Hi there, and welcome to episode 27 of the OGV Energy Let's Talk Transition podcast. I'm Murray Melchiorish, one of the principal consultants at ANIT Consulting. If you want to grow your business in the energy transition and need support with strategy and market entry, get in touch and let's discuss how. Here on the podcast, we set out to meet the leaders and innovators of the energy transition. So far, we've had government ministers, technology developers, academics, investors, and project developers. And today we continue that theme. Renewable energy has the potential to transform industry as we transition away from hydrocarbons. And already some amazing progress has been made. It's just been announced that last year Scotland generated 113% of its electricity from renewable sources. Now that's a great start, but offshore wind has the potential to do much more than that. We can become, of course, a major exporter of clean energy. Now, we've explored that a little bit in past episodes, of course, but at the end of the day, this is an industry attracting billions of pounds worth of investors from all over the world. And today, I'm really pleased to have on the show a European developer bringing massive development to Scotland in the shape of the Ayre and Bowdun projects. So welcome to the show, Pierre Pennell and Ian Taylor, Project Directors at Thistle Wind Partners. Pierre, if I can start with you, please, can you introduce yourself and your company?
Yes, thanks a lot, Maury, and thanks a lot for the opportunity to participate to this podcast and broadcast a bit about the adventure of TWP. Introducing myself, I'm Pierre Pennell. I'm one of the project directors from TWP, coming from one of the shareholders and the sponsors of the project, namely the company Care Group in France, who's an onshore and offshore project developer, currently developing a 30 megawatt pilot project in the Mediterranean that is pretty flagship for France and also for the floating industry. And my background is finance and legal and business administration.
Great, thank you very much, Pierre. And Ian, how about you?
So yes, Ian Taylor, project director, also for Thistle Wind Partners. I come from the DEME concessions side of the partnership. DEME is a marine contractor with many years of experience in building offshore wind farms. I spent 8 years with the company actually as the UK and Ireland area manager. So interestingly for me, I've been sat on the other side of the table, bidding into clients such as ourselves for the provision of offshore wind farm services.
Great, yes, we've all been there, and isn't tendering fun? But now you're on the other side, Ian. And look, so we've got Care, who are a major developer of onshore and offshore wind. We've got DEME, which is well known throughout the industry as being a major constructor of offshore wind farms. But there's Asavi too. Tell me a little bit about how the three companies came together and what they all bring to the partnership.
Yeah, sure. So just briefly mentioning Asavi to sort of complete the set, if you like. Asavi is also an offshore wind farm developer, and also is a member of Oteri, which is a Belgian offshore wind farm developer, of which DEME and Asavi are both members, as well as a number of other companies as well. So actually, all three companies have got quite a bit of experience of working together in the past. Certainly between DEME and Care, we've been working recently on the Port La Navelle, which I'm sure Pierre may well talk a little bit more about, which is a floating harbour, or a harbour for floating offshore wind in the Mediterranean. So that obviously brings a lot of experience in terms of how do you develop new sort of infrastructure for offshore wind, and how can you do that together and also maximize local content as well. So yeah, we know each other pretty well.
Yeah, that's some interesting content there. And look, just for our audience, can you give us a quick overview of Ayre and Bowdun, your two projects in Scotland?
Sure, absolutely. So starting from the top, Ayre offshore wind farm is a 1 gigawatt project. It's up to 100 meters of water depth, so it's a floating foundation. It's 1 gigawatt. And it's expected to have an AC radial connection into the Scottish mainland. And for the Bowdun offshore wind farm, similar distance offshore, also 1 gigawatt in slightly shallower water. So that's going to be a fixed bottom project, and they're both in their relatively early stages of development, both looking to sort of build out in early 2030s.
Right, and Ayre is off the east coast of Orkney, right? And
yes,
yeah, and Bowdun is off the east coast of, well, it's broadly opposite Stonehaven for those of us who know Aberdeenshire.
that's correct. Yes.
Perfect. Great. Good to know. Thank you very much. So, Ian, looking at these two projects, Ayre and Bowdun, how's the reaction been from the local communities?
Well, we've been out to the local communities for both projects. So for the Ayre project, we've spent quite some time up in the Orkney Isles and in Caithness as well. And I think in general, there's a reasonable amount of support for the projects. Got to remember these projects are a long way offshore, so it is generally the onshore elements where most people are going to be affected, if you like, and also perhaps to some extent in the longer term for the provision of O&M services, whereby local ports, let's say for the Ayre project, somewhere in the Orkney Isles would be an obvious location for the O&M facility. But in terms of that, yeah, I think generally pretty positive. There are obviously a lot of opportunities here during the development, but particularly during the construction period and in the operational period for goods and services to be provided locally.
Okay, brilliant. And look, think about the bigger picture. ScotWind has been described as, truly historic in terms of the opportunity for Scotland. Do you agree with that?
It is historic. I mean, it's huge. I mean, the 30 gigawatts, nearly 30 gigawatts of offshore wind is the biggest leasing round by far that's ever happened in the UK. And I think what that means is it creates a bit of a launch pad, if you like, for local businesses to be able to develop their goods and services for a local market, and then be able to, or in parallel, to be able to export those skills into the wider global market. And I think with the size that we're talking about here, that really creates also a very good economies of scale for these companies as well, which allows them to make those investments which are needed for some of this major infrastructure.
Right. And, we're now 2 years into the development cycle for the successful bidders. What have you learned about the scale of opportunity and how it's going to be delivered?
On the scale of ScotWind itself, commenting also from the French perspective, I mean, I think we as neighbors are very jealous about this strong push from the Scottish government and from the UK in general. And there are a lot of lessons learned from how it has been structured and how the private investment has been basically fostered here, giving visibility to investors and to the supply chain for namely 33 gigawatts of projects. And it's a very good example, I would say, now that our governments in Europe and especially in France are looking to match or to develop this energy transition to offshore wind. And to answer your question, basically those first 2 years have been great lessons learned from everybody, because we were all surprised by the magnitude of the efforts and the players that would be starting to race to meet those milestones for the consenting, for reaching the CFD phase. And it's basically being over the past years a non-stop race to catch the best talents, to build the teams and to build the best applications and the best files for everything. So we haven't really stopped for now. We don't really plan to stop running until we pass all those consenting and CFD phases. And it's been very, very exciting to be part of it.
Do you know, Pierre, I'm sure there will be many of our audience who will be very proud to hear you say that, France is jealous of a little country like Scotland and the pioneering position it's taking in the offshore wind industry. So on behalf of all the Scottish people listening, thank you very much. Now, I think, local content and supply chain development are going to be pretty critical to development of these projects and delivery of these projects, right? How are you going about looking to achieve that?
Well, we've got to start now and avoid the mistakes that have been made in the past. when trying to sort of source local content too close to financial close and such like. Ports need many years to develop and to be able to demonstrate that they're going to have the equipment and facilities available for the construction of these wind farms. So I think what allows TWP to be able to get in on this early is that we have an offshore marine contractor in the form of Demi Offshore, tier one contractor, alongside us, already there, to be able to have those early conversations with the supply chain. And I think that's fairly unique. And I also think that's pretty important because ultimately, Demi Offshore basically has the vessels, but it subcontracts everything else. So in other words, the fabrication of the foundations, the provision of the cables, some of the sort of transportation, installation, sort of support equipment that's needed. All that needs to be subcontracted, and you don't want to do that, a year or so before financial close if you want to maximize local content. It has to be done many years beforehand, and so that's why we're now working alongside Demi Offshore and talking to some local suppliers and ports to see how we can maximize that local content so that we can share what it is actually that we're going to be needing, both technically and commercially and financially, in order to close these contracts.
And now thinking about development of that local capability and local content, do you think there's a potential for it to become an export opportunity for Scotland?
I would say absolutely. And coming from this AOLMED project in France, we have seen, and again, it's paying a tribute to the Scottish efforts to promote their industry, but we've been approached and we've been discussing with Scottish Development International, SDI, for quite some years, because they are the arm of the government that are promoting the supply chain and the industry in Scotland. So they've been of great help trying to bring talents and know-how in France for that. And I think they're doing the same efforts with other countries. And that's something we really used. And one of the pride that we have with this AOLMED project, and we intend to bring here to ScotWind, is that this project is almost 100% local supply chain. So we made a point to bring up to speed industries that were not before used to work for the offshore industry and do heavy equipment and heavy welding, working on big steel pieces, for instance, or adapting their technology that they were dedicating to aerospace industry, for instance, to offshore wind. So it's kind of a long route to do that, and it takes some efforts. But as Ian said, with Demi Offshore, we have a tier one contractor for marine works that is really first class, and we are really happy to have it on board. And together with the experience we have developing the supply chain, which is maintaining basically a database and engaging one-to-one with all those companies to make sure even the smallest one can have a piece of the work, is definitely something TWP is putting a lot of effort into.
Great, and certainly, it was great to see the TWP team in Glasgow last week at the Offshore Wind conference, and that message, of course, was coming through loud and clear. It was great. But thinking about the international element, and ultimately, TWP is bringing together massive investment for Scotland through these projects. What gave you the confidence to invest in the UK and in Scotland in particular?
I think what gives investors the confidence to invest in the UK offshore wind market is that I guess the UK has consistently supported offshore wind for nearly 20 years or so through different governments, and I think that sort of longevity has created a fairly sort of stable environment to a greater or lesser extent, if you like. But generally, I think that sort of generates the confidence that offshore wind is something that the country really, really wants to build out. I think also offshore wind is the natural renewable energy source for the UK, unlike perhaps some other energy forms. We have a lot of wind, and we have a lot of North Sea in particular, with relatively shallow water depths, which really lends itself to offshore wind. So I think all those factors, the regulatory factors, the technical factors, all come together to make it a pretty attractive place to invest.
That is great, and of course it's great to see that both UK government and the Scottish government seem to be very supportive of offshore wind. But it's now 2 years since we found out who the winners of ScotWind were. What's the mood like? How has it changed?
I think realism has kicked in. I think it is. I think there's still a lot of enthusiasm, but I think now we see the challenges really ahead of us. We know what those challenges are. It's not as if we're ostriches and keeping our heads stuck in the ground. You know, they are being addressed. You know, for example, with regards to the Windsor report is one example to try and sort of expedite the delivery of the grid reinforcement. But you know, and a lot of the challenges that we're seeing now were actually there before ScotWind. They've just been magnified, if you like. So supply chain bottlenecks are still there. And the consenting concerns around the resources available to the licensing bodies, that's a concern around the delays potentially to getting consent. But we know those are well known and being addressed. So yeah, I think yeah, we're in this eyes wide open. But like Pierre says, you know, we're up to the challenge and looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'd like to dig into some more of those challenges
Okay.
a little bit in a little while. But just thinking again about the investment you've brought, you know, why should companies like DEMIC, Ayre and Asavi be welcomed into the offshore wind sector in Scotland? Why is it a good thing that companies like the three partners be brought into ScotWind and other licensing rounds?
Well, they've got a track record of delivering projects. I think that's probably a key one. Would you say, Pierre? I think there's again with certainly with DEMI offshore, there's the supply chain there at hand waiting to sort of build out these projects. I think there's a lot we can also bring to the Scottish industry as well, knowledge and know-how, as well as access to a tier one contractor. So that's would be my immediate thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with that. They're also quite long-term partners together, and they're used to work together. And I think it's important that you bring people around the table for this long-term race that know each other and that you know they're going to be able to face the challenges together because they've done it before and earlier. So I think that's of great value for the Scottish government to have those players committed to developing and implementing so big wind farms, basically. And it's a unique combination of both industrial players, operators, financing bodies that you don't necessarily find in other companies or consortiums. So I think it's attractive for both. Basically, we were very attracted by, as Ian said, like the long-term commitment from a political side of the UK government in general and Scotland to develop offshore wind. There's a mature regulatory framework which is going to bring confidence to investors, insurance company, everybody along the value chain of those projects. So it's definitely a win-win. And I think that's why we were also maybe chosen during that round and seen as a valuable competitor and somebody who's able to push the ball for the 40 years basically that you're committing to, even more than that. Like consider 10 years of development plus 35 years something of operation. It's a very long-term marriage that you want to enter into.
Well, yeah, and yeah, a long-term marriage, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Now, I mentioned last week, it was the Scottish Renewables Offshore Wind Conference in Glasgow, you know, a great event. And it certainly gave me the opportunity to speak to a lot of our guests, past guests and some future guests as well, and to just find out a little bit more about how they're getting on with their projects and what their concerns are. And it was interesting that these aspects of grid and consenting and supply chain were brought up by pretty much everybody I spoke with. Now, how much of these challenges are resulting from the sheer scale of ScotWind, do you think?
I think a lot of it actually, Murray. I think it was a bit of a surprise to the industry just how much capacity was let at the ScotWind round back in when it was January 2022. I think it took a lot of people by surprise, and I don't think the industry was properly prepared for that. So the National Grid and others and the TOs have been playing catch up, as well as the developers playing catch up, to try and see how we can connect in a coordinated fashion all these projects. And a lot of this power that's generated from onshore and the new offshore wind farm projects are going to have to go where the demands are, which are further south. You know, there isn't a demand in Scotland for this. So there's quite a bit of grid reinforcement work that needs to be done. and that I think has sort of created some real challenges. But so we are working together, and there's some good sort of conversations going on with National Grid energy systems operators as well as the TOs to see how we can do that. And that's actually quite a new thing, quite honestly, in this industry. And we'll have to continue to do that, but to solve these challenges. So that's grid is a real issue, and we are concerned that that the delay in announcing the grid connection dates doesn't go on for too long.
No, that's right. Ultimately, without grid, you can't export electricity. And without exporting electricity, it's difficult to then earn a return on the massive investment that you've made to build the wind farm in the first place. So, surely the certainty of grid connection is pretty essential to underpin an investment. Ian, you say that there's some good conversations going on, but a conversation doesn't transmit electricity, does it? Do you think we're getting the right level of investment from the grid? And, is it going to be in the right time scale? How do you see those challenges?
So I think in terms of the grid, there has been a lot of talk, but there's been a lot of action as well. And in terms of the investments that's needed to do those reinforcements, I don't think that's so much of an issue, to be honest. I think that's going ahead. I think it's timing more than anything else. We've seen in the past the difficulties in getting grid reinforcement, particularly overhead power lines and such like, consented. And that's one of the biggest concerns I think the industry faces, is how long is it going to take to have this major reinforcement completed, so all these projects can get connected and we can meet our net zero targets and such like. So yeah, that's the main concern I think that's faced with developers. And I think coupled with that also, we know that there are very long lead times for HVDC equipment, and a lot of these projects are being connected using HVDC. So there certainly needs to be probably some early commitments, probably by National Grid or the TOs in major plant, so that they could be made available in time for our projects without any more delay.
Great. And what can you tell us about the general sort of consenting process and how that's developing for all of this?
I think that's the second main item that we're scrutinizing. Definitely, we're talking about the grid, and that is something that is really under, as I said, scrutiny from the investors to know how to time their efforts, basically. And there's trust right now, and beyond talks, there are agreements that are being entered into to be sure that everybody does what it has to do, basically, to make that happen. So I think on the consenting side, it's a little bit similar. The cumulated impact and effects on all those wind farms being installed, it's still unknown for everybody, basically, from the regulator side, from the authorities, and also from the developers. So obviously, everybody's putting a lot of efforts and money to analyze properly what are going to be the impact on the wildlife, on the marine mammals, and how the wind farm should basically address all those and insert themselves in an existing environment without disturbing, basically, or mitigating the potential negative impacts. But the big unknown for us is how they're going to be viewed and how they're going to be analyzed, because such magnitude has never been seen before. So Ian was talking about the resources of the authorities to analyze all the reports and studies that we are going to deliver to them at one point. So this is a big question mark for us, basically, on that. We have a lot of in-house experts and external suppliers, service providers who are working on those. There are great findings on this right now. How all this information is going to be processed, how it's going to be translated into regulations, mitigation measures, is still for us very, very unknown. So wait and see a little bit, work and see, I would say.
Work and see rather than wait and see. Yeah, I like that. And this week it became clear to me that just how much work there is ongoing in the background. You've got 2 scoping reports due fairly imminently. Can you give us a flavour for what those cover? What do they include?
Yeah, so the scoping report for the Ayre onshore element of our project was submitted just the other week ago. The scoping report for Bowdun will be sort of just later this first half of the year, and the scoping reports for the offshore array areas will be later this year as well. So a lot of work needed to prepare those, and in those scoping reports, basically, they provide us for a more high-level overview of the project design, both on and offshore, in order to provide sufficient information for the licensing bodies to provide an opinion to us as to how we should address those in our environmental impact assessment and our main planning application.
Okay, so quite a lot to be done then, quite a lot of content. So how are you tackling the uncertainties and potential roadblocks that you're coming across?
That's a very good point, and I think there's no one size fits all for those questions. It's a constant analysis of what we have in front of us and a constant adjustment of the steps and how we put the efforts both on the technical development and the financial investment. There are questions coming from I would say the people who are investing in those projects to be sure that every step we make is going to be followed by the next one, and there's not going to be anything that is going to discourage basically the authorities or delay the project. So I would say it's a permanent due diligence and analysis of the environment, and being agile and flexible in the approach, maybe trying to reinvent a bit the typical rule of developing projects in the UK, which is also, I think, something that being European companies, both DEME and CARE can bring into the picture, being some form of not totally newcomers in the picture, but bring a fresh view and bringing some different methods for developing projects. So without giving secrets, but there's a great need for agility and flexibility in the project development approach. So I think we're doing that pretty well for now.
Good, that's good to hear. And Pierre, earlier you mentioned there was a level of jealousy from France about the scale of the offshore wind potential in Scotland. How about the offshore wind development process? How does that compare between France and the UK? Is that something to be jealous of?
No, I mean, yeah, jealousy is one thing. I think the jealousy is about the pace and having started the process much earlier than in France. There have been a lot of discussions over the past 10 years of how should offshore wind be developed and deployed in France. Ultimately, ambitious goals have been set. There's 50 gigawatts to be installed in 2050, which is a reasonable goal when you know that we have less than 2 gigawatts right now. But the approach to tendering and to auctioning is slightly different. The process, when you go to an auction in France and to a tender, basically when you win this tender, you win the grid connection, the tariff, and the lease at the same time. So the three keys to unlock this kingdom of selling electricity. In the UK, the process is more sequential. You get first access to the lease, then you get to need the consent, and then you get the CFD, and ultimately you can go to financial close. So the timing of efforts is a little bit different. So it means in France, before going to apply for a tender, you need to already spend a lot of money to do some form of pre-development and do some preliminary studies on environmental side, on the grid side. And the government has taken the approach to de-risk a lot by doing himself the geotechnical studies, for instance, and providing this data and the metocean studies and providing this data to the tenderers for them to be more comfortable. So the approach is slightly different. It's a bit more centralized, and it's like when you win something, you're sure you're going to connect, but it takes a lot of resources to go there, and it took a long time to the government to decide how to do it, basically. But the bottlenecks are the same. The resources internally to analyze the applications and to be up to speed with the quality of what the private sector is bringing, basically, around the table. So,
yeah, okay, so the bottlenecks are the same, but it's quite a different process. It sounds to me, though, that if the French process is de-risking things for the operators, then that might be a step towards a sort of best practice model almost. Do you think, is that something you would like to see rolled out and used for inspiration in other countries looking to adopt offshore wind?
I'm not sure. From French perspective, I'm not sure, actually, because it's taking a lot out of the developer's hand, that's for sure. So it's supposed to help them. Ultimately, it's kind of delaying the process also. It might make it a little bit heavier in terms of process, because you need the government to enter into contracts with vessel owners, with companies. So this is a very cumbersome process for that, and it doesn't give any flexibility to the developers to bring agility basically in the process. So it's at the same time de-risking and at the same time taking a little bit of trust, then the private sector can do the job as good or better than the government would do. So I think there's a need to meet in between and to do a real public-private partnership for that and sit together. So, but in France, it's still very early stage. This sector is still very early years. So countries would benefit basically for the different approaches for that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Now, if we can turn just to the road ahead, can you explain the route to market then for your projects?
Yeah, sure. So the base case for us is to try and secure a CFD, contracts for difference, probably around 2028-ish sort of time. So I think that's AR9, AR10. Of course, we don't really know what AR9 and AR10 are going to look like in 4 years' time. So, you know, there are some downsides in doing a CFD. There can be quite a lot of constraints in the contract. So an alternative that we will be considering is a sort of a private or merchant power purchase agreement with a third party. That's another possibility for sure. And I suppose, I mean, we have looked at hydrogen, for instance, as another route to market for our projects. But I think for ScotWind 1, our view is it's probably just a bit too far away to be able to rely on in order to make a proper solid investment case on. And in any case, you know, the way the market works, there's no reasons why we couldn't, you know, sell the power to a PPA, which then goes on to sell it to a hydrogen plant, and you do it in a commercial fashion rather than, you know, having to consent, if you like, a private wire to a hydrogen facility, which obviously carries a lot of consenting risk and potentially redundant costs. So, yeah, CFD or a PPA is our route to market at the moment.
Yeah, great. So brilliant. So that's interesting, isn't it? So selling electricity is, you know, priority number one, priority two, maybe in the future looking at hydrogen, but it's not quite there yet.
Yeah,
there's a bit of work to be done around that, isn't there?
Yes, there is, technically and commercially. Yeah,
technically and commercially, for sure. So look, you know, we've mentioned DEME's role in the project, you know, and of course DEME is known as a, you know, fairly broad spectrum contractor, who of course I've worked with for many years as well, albeit as a subcontractor. Now, DEME will be ultimately building the wind farm offshore. Can you take us through then the Scottish local content that the project is going to bring, how that's achieved, given that DEME will be doing everything that people see?
Well, DEME will be like, if you like, the tier one contractor. And what I mean by that, that's like the main contractor that will, if you like, some people call it turnkey, if you like, for the offshore element. But as I was saying earlier, sitting behind that will be a lot of major subcontracts. We're a long way off deciding, you know, who's to get those particular main contracts. And you know, DEME offshore people, along with DEME TWP people, will be out in the market looking to see what companies locally within Scotland can be providing in terms of fabrication facilities. There's also going to be, we expect there'll be a lot of inward investment from maybe foreign companies coming into Scotland to bring their experience and setting up a facility in Scotland itself. We know that's happening in a number of areas. So I think, you know, we want to be working with them quite early. Obviously, for us, it's the challenge is trying to secure capacity, you know, when you've got 30 gigawatts of projects also trying to secure the same thing. So we are also having some early discussions with other developers to see how we can sort of plan sequentially how we secure some of this local capacity and such like as well. So I mean, the kind of goods and services, you know, cables, HV cables for sure, elements of the foundations, if not the whole fabrication facility. You've got wet storage required, particularly for floating offshore wind, but also for fixed bottom onshore wind as well, offshore wind as well. What else have you got? Offshore substations. So, you know, working with electrical OEMs, some of which have got bases here in the UK as well. So there's and there's lots of other things like grouting suppliers, more your second and third tier type companies, cable protection equipment, Gravity cranes. So there's a whole list of goods and services which we've actually shared at various supply chain events over the last year and a half in Scotland.
Great. And Pierre, how's your experience been in France in terms of developing local content for your projects there?
It's been a challenge. I mean, I cannot say it's an easy route, especially for new technologies and new projects like offshore wind. But it hasn't been possible to do without the support of the government. I must say that, and it's great to see also how the Scottish government is involved. So they're definitely the link, the necessary link between the developers who are in need for industrial supply and the industrial supply chain who needs clients. And to make that match happen, there's a need for, I would say, maybe wedding counselor in a sense, to make sure that the offer is adapted to the demand. And it worked pretty well in France at a regional level because the pilot wind farms were done in two different southern regions, and the regions themselves have dedicated the necessary resources and provided the funding that helped those companies to scale up basically and to bring their production facilities up to the quality level of being able to service and to supply this industry. So it's an ongoing effort for both parties. We've seen, for instance, in the first bottom fixed wind farm that wind turbine manufacturers have played the game and believed in the political vision up to the point where they installed blade factories, nacelle factories at port facilities directly. Same thing for the towers for that. And definitely there's an expectation to go one step further now for the other projects, especially the floating offshore wind, which is going to bring a new set of needs basically in terms of product and services for that. And those we still don't know exactly what they're going to look like because the industry is not mature. There's no standard product like there is in bottom fixed for 10 more 20 years now. So everybody has to discuss on a permanent base basically to find what is going to be good for the industry and attract the necessary capital. So, and they can come from any place in the world. We're seeing Asian companies very interested in coming and installing facilities. I've seen those in Scotland, but also in France. And they have the capabilities, industrial and financial, to start those massive industrial plans that we saw in Europe maybe after war, and that are difficult to trigger now because of the cost of money and the companies are indebted and the governments. But it can refresh really the industrial landscape in Europe with those big infrastructure projects. So I think everybody's very positive, but the governments want to try to maximize the local part, of course. So it's both collaboration and fight to make sure it happens as we want it to happen.
Yeah, great. The opportunity is incredible, isn't it? It really is an industrial revolution. It's quite amazing. Now, look, think about the governments and their input. It is brilliant that the UK and the Scottish government have both been very supportive of offshore wind pretty consistently. But this year, we've got a UK general election. How's that going to affect your projects? And what are you hearing from communities? How do you think that'll play into this?
It's a difficult question, that one. We hope that with perhaps the Labour Party coming in, but we can't say for sure. But there'll be, even a doubling down on efforts to support and trying to sort of deliver our net zero, with offshore wind playing a major part of that. And helping us to reduce some of these potential bottlenecks in grid and consenting that we see in front of us. So we hope that they will, increasingly support the industry to help us deliver. That's not to say that, particularly in Scotland, that there has been a lot of support there, both through the SIM, the strategic investment model. I think that's a really unique new mechanism which has not been ever tried before, which I think just really gets that visibility out there to all the developers and potential investors and everything else, as to sort of what we could back and at an early stage to actually deliver some of this supply chain. So we really hope that whoever comes into power later this year, or maybe very early next year, who's to see, that they will continue to support the whole SIM process. And obviously, the 500 million that's was announced at the end of last year by the Scottish Government to support offshore wind is also very welcome as well. But yeah, I think there just needs to be a real focus, though, now, a real focus on trying not to support absolutely everything, but trying to sort of pick some real winners and make sure they are delivered. Because I think some of the mistakes that we've had in the past is that we try to support a whole range of potential companies or ideas, innovations, and you end up actually delivering very little for the actual market itself. So pick some winners, remain focused, grab the low-hanging fruit, if you like, and see what we can deliver.
Right, good. Pick winners and see what we can deliver. It's a good message, and of course, we'll all be looking to see how the sim delivers on that. So most interesting.
Yeah.
Now, Ian and Pierre, as you know, in this show, we try to support and inspire people who might want to get involved in the energy transition and make their careers in it. And to do that, I'm always keen to try and understand what drives the business leaders. So for each of you, please, what does the energy transition mean to you? Who wants to go first? Pierre, do you want to go first?
Yeah, that's almost a very philosophical question, Moray, for that. But I mean, what's inspiring being part of this industry? I joined the global renewable energy industry about 20 years ago, starting with onshore developments. And the first idea was to try to get some, I would say, energy independency, get rid of fossil fuel and get some control about the way you are producing your energy, and also helping other countries to do that. So that was the beginning of the year 2000, a strong push to bring those early stage wind and solar technology also to some developing countries. And that's this extraordinary adventure to do something that is cleaner, that is local, that can empower the people and the communities. That was a very strong driver for onshore wind and solar. Offshore is a bit different, but it pushes the ball a step further because it gives the magnitude of the big fossil fuel plants that we were using. I don't want to say in the past, but we're still using. And same for nuclear plants that are able to serve big cities and big countries. But you can still do that with renewable energy. And I think that's incredibly seducing and attractive to know that you can benefit from all the know-how and the experience of both what the onshore renewable energy industry has been doing and the find-outs for maybe the oil and gas and the offshore work, and take this know-how from oil and gas and transmit it to renewable energy. That's something that is very attractive, I would say. So you need to be some form of visionary and believer in the future for that, but there are a huge amount of jobs to be created for that, new jobs to be invented still. And that's an everyday challenge, basically, to reinvent the way you're doing this business and adapting all those technologies. So that's very exciting.
Great. Ian, I'll ask you just about that in a second, but just to quickly touch on that, Pierre, it's interesting that you talk there about the importance of learning the lessons of the oil and gas industry and bringing the know-how across, because, of course, I think that message is often lost among people, just how important that information and experience really is to offshore wind, isn't it?
It is, and it's very central actually today. If you just look at the number of companies from oil and gas that are now big players in the offshore wind, it tells you about how applicable their technology are to renewable energy. And I think the main difference that everybody has spotted is that the top line is totally different, and meaning the revenue stream that you're going to put in front of what you are going to produce with this infrastructure is different. And when you get an oil barrel that is around $100, for instance, you can allow yourself to do one-off designs and be very picky in the way you are going to install that. So don't want to say you can waste money, but you can spend without counting for that. So offshore renewable brings a total different setup, because you have a limitation in the price of the kilowatt hour and the electricity you are injecting into the grid, because your people cannot pay more than a certain amount for having their kettle boiling water, basically. A challenge to bring new, maybe, way of developing, designing, building projects, keeping the same health standards, safety standards, quality applicable to the industry, but at the same time pushing it a step further with new production tools, with new IT tools, basically. So I think it's a very, very great opportunity for everything that is marine, and maybe oil and gas can at the same time benefit from those.
Brilliant. Well, that was a really interesting response. Thank you, Pierre. No pressure, Ian. Why does the energy transition matter to you?
I just wanted to first pick up on just what Pierre said at the very end there, actually, before I get onto that one, because yeah, I used to work for a company called SLP Engineering based in Lowestoft. When I joined them back in 2003, which is when I first started my journey properly with renewables, so a bit like Pierre, for about the last 20 years I've been involved. SLP Engineering was an oil and gas contractor, and I actually saw their yard out in the Lowestoft Harbour. I was brought in to lead up their renewables business, so I was the first one in, if you like. And I was basically working with my oil and gas colleagues and trying to get them to understand what we were doing in renewables, and actually trying to transpose all their key knowledge and experience in dealing with the offshore environment, and how we could then use that to build out some offshore wind. And one of the key challenges was one, to understand each other's industries, and they were like sort of night and day, completely different back then. Different languages, different health and safety levels, and everything else. But I think it was a really useful and interesting exercise, and I think in terms of the main challenge was the sort of production line mentality that you need in renewables, which you don't have in oil and gas. Oil and gas are one-off installations, and so that creates one mindset. And then trying to move that mindset into serial production was really, really tough, because it means sort of like unpicking everything that you did and then putting it in terms of design and fabrication, installation, and then putting it back together again to try and see how you could reduce costs and also to make it financially viable. So that I was like, if you like, there in terms of that sort of transition very much in the very, very, very early days. But yeah, I mean, I've been fascinated and in renewables since about the age of 18, when I was doing my A-level project, designing balsa wood blades for wind turbines and measuring how much electricity they actually produced. So it's something I always went into, but I think at the end I never realised where I'd end up, which is now. And I think it's not a straight line. You can never you can have a crystal ball. You can't see where you're really going to be going. So grab those opportunities as they sort of come along. But yeah, I think it's been an interesting journey so far.
Good. So Ian, just to go back to the question, why does the energy transition matter to you?
The energy transition matters to me ultimately because we need to maintain that the security of supply. We need to meet the net zero targets, and all the good things that come around that, and why we're doing that in terms of climate change, biodiversity. Fundamentally, that's what it means to me, and that's what drives me in terms of what I do. The secondary aspect of that is the fact that you're also, as an engineer, you're also trying to sort of come up with new solutions, particularly in offshore wind, to actually try and deliver those targets. So it's a mixture of engineering and a passion for actually why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Brilliant, thank you. And look, so Ian, you started your career back in SLP in Great Yarmouth, and Pierre, Lowestoft, you said, wasn't it? Not Great Yarmouth.
Oh yes.
Yeah. I've just offended an awful lot of people. Apologies. And Pierre, you began in onshore wind, but I'm keen to know, you're both successful individuals, respected in the industry. When you look back at your careers, what advice would you give to your younger selves just embarking on your career? What advice would you give to somebody today leaving university and considering what to do with their lives? Who would like to go first? Don't both shout at once. Go on, Pierre, why don't you go first?
I don't know. It's a very difficult question. I mean, I think the typical answers to those questions still apply here. I mean, is be consistent with what you want, and if you want to join a particular industry, or if you believe you can have an impact in something, I mean, don't give up. The careers have become incredibly technical, and the level of expertise that is needed in those companies has really increased over the past 10, 15, 20, 25 years, just because the technique has evolved, just because the tools are more complicated to use. So it tends to take longer time to be, I would say, employable for the young generations. But at the same time, there's a great need for refreshing the way things are being done, and that there are a lot of communications or bridges between the different type of industries. For instance, I'm thinking the way like projects were developed and constructed. Like 10 years ago, we had the typical waterfall approach where you needed to define everything up front in terms of specification, and you know before starting the journey where you want to end and exactly which step you're going to walk into. IT sector has taught a lot to this industry by this agile methodology to say you're going to design basically, and you're going to find your design and define the user needs as you walk. So don't be afraid to start a journey without knowing where you're going to go. Just believe in it. And I think that's a great lesson learned for us, both as, let's say, project developers and industry leaders, and also as individuals. It's not because it's difficult and complicated and you do not have all the skills you need at the beginning that you have to stop the journey or stay at school for 10 or 15 years. I mean, just be daring, just pick your phone, just contact people. It has never been as easy as today to contact any leader. You can contact a CEO through LinkedIn and try your luck. Most of the time it works, definitely.
Brilliant. I like that. So be daring and don't be afraid to start your journey. Excellent. Yeah. And Ian?
Yeah, I would second a lot of that, to be honest. But I mean, and it's the same advice I give to my kids who are 18 and 21 now, is take the opportunities really as they come along. Never give up on learning. Conferences like the one we had last week, you know, so many fascinating conversations and made me think completely differently about certain areas. People with some great innovative solutions, makes you then think about something else, and you never know where that might lead. You know, certainly for me and Pierre at the moment, you're thinking, okay, where would that lead for my project? You know, but it also could, where could that lead in terms of a particular area of specialism which I might want to go into in terms of my job? And I say to my kids, just go out there and create as many opportunities for yourself as you can possibly get, and then decide which one interests you most, and then just follow that. And that's largely how I followed my career. I just wish I'd done a lot more of it earlier on as well, because who knows what, you know, where I might be. But I think I've been fortunate so far.
Good, that's great. And guys, in each episode, as you know, we ask all of our guests to set a question for our next guests without knowing who they're going to be. And in the last episode, we met the Global Chief Operating Officer for Unique Group, a business headquartered out in the United Arab Emirates, but they were telling us all about the brilliant autonomous solutions that they're developing and how that's contributing to reducing carbon footprint. Now, Martin Charles at Unique left this question for you. How is artificial intelligence going to impact the energy transition and the sector as a whole? Who would like to take this one first? Ian, well, you look keen.
I'll give it a go. Look, I think we have now a lot of wind farms out there now, and I think they're now collecting a huge amount of data. You know, both meteorological data. You know, they've all got the units up on top of on the nacelles collecting wind data, all around the North Sea and all around the world. So you know that could be all brought together. You've also got a lot of condition monitoring going along with the foundations and elsewhere. You know, so there's a real opportunity to, one, use that data using AI to help improve energy capture, for instance, and improve the efficiency of those wind farms on a real-time basis. You can use all that condition monitoring data to help improve the effectiveness of your preventative maintenance regimes and such like. You know, that's a big one, because particularly with these projects so far offshore now, you know, it costs a lot of money to go out there and fix them. And if you can actually nip these things in the bud using some AI, using maybe autonomous drones, everything else, you know, that can go out there, you know, those operational costs, one, come down, and two, your production goes up. So it's a win-win.
Great. So reducing costs and increasing production. That's absolutely win-win. Brilliant. And Pierre, do you have the same view?
I do have the same view. Those are very, very good points. And I mean, when condition monitoring systems appeared years ago, like putting sensors everywhere on those producing items, we believed we would never know what to do with all this data and collecting this information. So much has happened since that time. And now this data has become the gold basically of the industry, and you can improve it so much. But you need people to analyze the data. So artificial intelligence can definitely help on that. But I'm also thinking at very maybe upstream stages also of the project, considering artificial intelligence is in even infancy years right now. So we're just seeing a very limited amount of possibility that they could deliver in the future, and not underestimating the capacity of our engineers and consultants. But when you see the type of analysis, data gathering, data compilation, data analysis on text, and doing desktop studies that this artificial intelligence can do, what it will be able to do in 10 years, I have no idea. Maybe our consenting report will be totally done by an artificial intelligence. You never know. And I wouldn't presume, when I see the changes right now, and you see people are able to write award-winning novels based on artificial intelligence, or write scenarios and screenplays, what will be available in 10 years, I have no idea. But don't want to say maybe artificial intelligence is going to design the next floater for the floating wind industry, just picking up and leveraging on everything that has been done in all the oil and gas world over the past 30 years. Who knows?
Yeah, so potentially a whole lot more efficiency to be had. Brilliant. Thank you. And I did ask as well if I did ask ahead of today's recording if you could put some thought into a question for our next guest. Have either of you had a chance to put something together? Have you managed to agree on what the question will be for the next guest?
Yes, we've got something here we could give to the next guest.
Brilliant. Go on then, Ian. Let us have it. Okay.
Around collaboration, which I know, Murray, was a word used a heck of a lot last week and has been used for several months so far. So it's been used a lot in the offshore wind industry when it comes to ScotWind particularly, where we can collaborate and are collaborating in a variety of ways, developer forums, STEM pathways and such like, and the SIM, of course. And we've been sort of tasked by the Scottish government to really sort of leverage on this and deepen the collaboration as much as possible. So the question is, what do you think we need to do to break down the traditional secrecy and barriers to collaboration in the energy sector?
Yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy, isn't it? Because often you would see these companies as being competitors, and yet competitors are being asked to collaborate.
Yeah, and there was quite a few discussions I was having last week about this, and you may well feel, or the industry may well feel, that the way the industry is heading is actually not going to really help collaboration, because there's such a competition around grid capacity. There's a competition around getting your project consented, particularly with the SMP review going on at the moment, the Sector Marine Plan review going on at the moment. So it does actually rather encourage developers to sort of withdraw into their silos and just concentrate on their projects, which actually is the worst thing that we should be doing, given the amount of projects which need to be developed. So
it's funny, isn't it, as well, when you think about how we do business, you propose that you have a discussion, and the first thing anybody says is, let's get a non-disclosure agreement in place. And of course, from that moment on, collaboration actually becomes quite difficult.
Yes, it's very true.
Yeah, there we go. So look, that brings us to the end of our podcast recording today. Thank you so much for joining us, Pierre Pennell and Ian Taylor, project directors at Thistle Wind Partners.
Thanks very much, Maury. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
So it's been really interesting to. Thank you. Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure to have you. So it's been really interesting to get the perspective of both Ian and Pierre today. Major international business investing in Scotland and creating considerable local value, both in Scotland, and actually we found out quite a lot about local content in France as well, and the different consenting regimes there. But what strikes me most is the problems we've still got around grid and consenting. Now, these are consistently brought up by every developer, And ultimately, if we're going to achieve an energy transition, then these really need to be priorities 1 and 2 for the government. So let's see the grid and the consenting process get the resources it needs. Without it, all this green energy is just not going to happen. So, as always, your feedback that we get on each episode is brilliant, much appreciated. Often you get in touch through LinkedIn, but feel free to email me as well. It's Murray, that's Moray, at anetconsulting.com. And if you've enjoyed this episode with Thistle Wind Partners today and you'd like to see some of our other episodes, you can find them all on ogv.energy or, of course, on Spotify and YouTube and all the usual places you might find your podcasts. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you soon for another episode of Let's Talk Transition. Thank you.